on what you see here on the screen, the fruits of the Spirit. These things that we believe that if we call ourselves a Christian, if we believe the gospel, and if Christ really has entered us, then the Spirit comes in us and it starts to change us from the outside. One of the things I said at the very beginning when we talked about love is that these 9 things are not a recipe for moral correctness. They're not things you do to make God happy. Rather, they're things that happen to you after you've believed in Jesus Christ as your Savior. The Spirit, there's something supernatural that comes in you. It's not restraining yourself to be more loving or trying to be more patient. Rather, it's letting the Spirit come in you and change you from the inside. And so that others in your life can start to see some of these things exhibited. And I know it's a daunting list. Every week we've gone through one, and you probably leave feeling like, I don't have any of these, maybe half of one, a quarter of the other, 0 of that one. And it can feel very defeating, but the point of these is that they are fruits of the Spirit, not fruits of your work or my work. And so we get to the end now, and we get to this one of self-control. Now, self-control. Paul says in Galatians, he lists these 9 out, and he says the last one is self-control, against such there is no law. And then in this letter to the Corinthian church, he at the very end uses the same word. It's a word in Greek, says ego kratao, which is ego, myself, and kratao, command. So he says those have self-command, command of themselves. And in thinking about this, and I'm going to venture a guess here, not many of us in this room probably feel that this is on the top of our list of issues that we deal with. See, all the other ones, being a more loving person, being a more patient person, those are ones people say, yeah, I know, I need that one. But self-control, it's a little bit trickier. And yet Paul says if you are a Christian and you are changed, you will start to exhibit self-control. You'll be able to command yourself. And he's got such a broad definition for what this means, and such a beautiful definition. Let me give this illustration. See, I used to preach at a homeless mission in New York City a lot. Back in New York, I'd preach at a homeless mission once a month. And every time that I had a sermon about self-control, or controlling yourself, or reining yourself in, the ears would perk up. The people would be wide-eyed. Why? Because they knew that they had absolutely lost control in their life. And so to hear a message about self-control was extremely inviting to them. But for us folks, we tend to think of self-control and say things like, I know, I need to clean up that part of my life, but I'm not completely out of control. And Paul uses a beautiful metaphor of an athlete today to tell us what it means to be self-controlled and what the gospel can do for that. He's giving the secret, and here's how I titled it on your outline, and you can follow along. Hopefully most of you have a sermon outline. You can follow along. I titled it this way: first, self-control, then self-control, and then self-control. If you're following along, you know that I just said the same word 3 times. First, self-control. Secondly, self-control. And third, self-control. Here's what I mean by that. Let's jump into this. First, self-control. Self-control. See, I put the emphasis on the word control because you and I, whether or not we're ready to admit it this morning, have an extreme problem with control. We have an extreme problem with being out of control in certain aspects of our life. Do you look back at verse 24? Paul says all the runners run. Not just some, all of them run. He says, all of you are dealing, all of us, all of me, all of you, we're all dealing with issues of control in some aspect of our life. Now, I know some of you, if you struggle with something like chocolate, some of you just like to eat chocolate a lot. And that's an easy way to say, I know, Pastor, I lack self-control. Every 3 o'clock in my office when the chocolate comes out, I have to have it. I can't, I don't want it. I want to be thin. I don't want to eat the chocolate, but I have to eat the chocolate. And you say, Pastor, good, self-control, teach me all about it. But Paul, and psychology knows, control runs much deeper than that. The lack of self-control, yes, you can write it off to food and drink, and you can say, those people who eat too much and those people who drink too much. Wait a moment. Because the minute that you look at others and say, that's eating too much chocolate, that's the lack of self-control. You're missing what control and self-control actually is and how deep it goes into your heart. Most of us feel that we're not dealing with issues of control or self-control because we don't have a problem with chocolate. And I'm going to mention chocolate a lot during this service. I have nothing against chocolate. It just came to my head. So if you like chocolate, don't feel condemned. Chocolate's good. But people say, okay, listen, I have a real problem with chocolate, therefore I lack self-control. Other people say, I don't have a problem with chocolate, so I don't have a problem with self-control. Oh, really? Dig deep into your life. Because the minute that you say, I don't have a problem with self-control, is probably when you are masking the very thing that you have a problem with controlling. And it comes across as something like this. And I'm sure you've heard people say this. I'm not perfect, but at least I'm not like that. And do you see what they're doing when they say that? When you say, I'm not perfect, but at least I'm not like that, what you're saying is, I have got other control issues in my life that I'm not willing to talk about. So I want to control those things. And I don't want you to know. See what you're doing? You're exhibiting control because you're out of control. And some people in their life, and you know these people, demonstrate an enormous amount of control in their life. You would look at them and say they are in complete and utter control. They're wonderful parents. Their children are always controlled. They eat well. They sleep well. They're very disciplined in life. But what you find typically with people who look completely in control of their lives those are the ones who typically look at other people and say, why can't they get it together like I have it together? Let me illustrate this. Believe it or not, and don't laugh, please don't laugh, this will really hurt my feelings, but you can laugh a little bit. Believe it or not, I used to be a personal trainer. Now you can chuckle a little bit. People used to pay me to make them fit, okay? I know, laugh it up, it's okay. And not anymore, obviously, nobody's gonna pay me looking at the package that I come in, but people used to pay me to make them fit. And you know what I found? When I worked in the gym, and I worked for a couple years in a gym, and when I worked in the gym, I was surrounded by people who also got paid to train other people and make them fit. You know what the one common thread I found was? These are people who look like they have absolutely everything in control. Their bodies are pristine. They eat well. They sleep well. But you know what I always found? They always looked at other people and said, why can't they get it together like I have it together? You see what's happening? Even in their control. They're out of control in their control freakness. Do you see that? Even control freaks are out of control because they can't control the sense of control that they want to have over everyone else to do exactly what they do and how they do it. Everyone is out of control. From the chocolate eaters to the control freaks. We either want to control others and we're out of control in doing that, or we can't control ourselves. And Paul here gives a beautiful metaphor of what it means to get self-control. See, at the beginning I emphasized the word control because we are all of us, very much so, out of it. Your problem may be chocolate, or it may be much deeper than that. Control, it's not just about chocolate. What about the people who criticize others too much and can't control their tongues? It's not just about drinking too much. What about the people who talk too much about other people and they can't control how much they talk? And it's not just about destroying your body. What about the people who are destroying their hearts? See, control goes deep like a tree. And the lack of self-control is present in every aspect of our life. And if you don't think it, it's probably because you're covering up one aspect of your life and where you're completely out of control. Paul knows this. Because he's talking to a group of people in the Corinthian church who are utterly out of control. These are people who are wealthy, intelligent, worldly, cultured, and they don't know where to draw the line. They gossip about other people, they criticize other people, and they display a complete lack of morality. And Paul says, listen, you are all out of control. Here's how to get self-control. What is self-control? What is self-control? See, let's push this athlete metaphor a little bit further. Push it out. An athlete, they like chocolate too. I told you I was going to talk a lot about chocolate today. But they know what makes them know that they can't gorge themselves but instead they have to go exercise. What makes them know they can't stay up all night? What makes them have any amount of discipline? Here's what it is for an athlete. If you talk to any athlete, this is the same for all of them. They're not superhuman. They simply know the priorities. They know their priorities. They know that exercise takes priority over eating that chocolate. They know that getting up early takes priority over staying out late because they're the athlete. Now, what makes you and I make those types of decisions in our life? St. Augustine, in his wonderful book, Confessions. And by the way, if you ever want to know somebody who's completely out of control, go to Mr. Augustine before he became St. Augustine. He was out of control, utterly. With drink, with food, with women, with life. Every aspect of his life was out of control. After he became a Christian, he wrote a book called Confessions. And in there, he gives one of the best ways to explain what keeps you and me from having self-control. He says that every sin, every sinful choice, every choice that you and I make, every lack of right decision, every lack of self-control is rooted in the fact that you and I have what he calls disordered loves. He says, listen, if you want to know why you make bad decisions, why you make out-of-control decisions in your life, it's because you and me, we have loves that are disordered. He says, your primary loves, love for God, love for serving others, love for caring for others, those take a backseat to other loves that you have in your life. And for him, he says, looking back on his life, he says his loves were completely out of order before him. The primary thing that he should be loving was taking a back seat, and all these other temporal, small loves, little tiny loves, temporary loves, were creeping up in his life. And it's the same for you and me. Let me give a contrast here of what I mean by disordered loves. Eating chocolate every day versus being thin. The love of your health has been surpassed by the love of immediate comfort. Cheating on a test. The love of demonstrating good character has been surpassed by the love of achievement. The inability to stop speaking badly of other people. The love of relationships has been surpassed by the love of being vindicated. Lying. The love of the truth has been surpassed by the love of being thought of well by others. The inability to serve people who've hurt you and wronged you. The love of God's service has been surpassed for your love to seek justice done or revenge. See, athletes restrain their body because their loves are in the right order. Augustine knew this. Paul knows this. He says, if you want self-control, you have to treat yourself as an athlete. Reorder your loves. Put the primary love that should be the number one spot in the number one spot, not the secondary loves, not the love for attention, not the love for achievement, not the love for recognition. He says, if you want self-control, you will have to reorder your loves. How do you do it? See, first was self-control. We all have a problem with it. Secondly was self-control. We need to focus on ourselves to reorder our loves. But here's the problem. If you try it, if you say, yes, Pastor, I want to reorder my loves this morning. That sounds so poetic and nice. Thank you, Augustine. You won't make it down that staircase before the small loves creep up again. The petty loves. You and I, to reorder our loves, need something more powerful, more special, more transcendent, more supernatural than just simply our willpower. And it comes in another place in the Bible, closely linked to the letters of Paul in Hebrews chapter 12, when they talk about another race. The writer here, Paul says, like an athlete who runs the race exhibits self-control. In the book of Hebrews, the writer says, there was another race. And in Hebrews chapter 12, he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. End of sermon. Go run the race. Get rid of sin. No. He doesn't stop there. And I'm not going to stop there. He says, get away with every sin that clings to you and run the race. That sounds good, right? We won't make it down the stairs. But he finishes this way. And he says in verse 2, Hebrews chapter 12, looking to Jesus, the founder and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Here. You want self-control? You want to run the race? You won't be able to do it on your own, and you know it. The small loves will creep back into your heart and take it over. The petty loves. You want a real love? Look to this guy. What was the joy set before Jesus that he would run a race? You. What crown did he get at the end of that race? A crown of thorns. What was the prize that he got for running that race? The cross. Jesus ran a race in which he knew he would die. He exhibited utter self-control, and he lost it all on the cross for you and for me, so that in our moments of self-control, when we need self-control, we can look to him and see it on the cross. He ran and got a crown of thorns. Paul says, remember in 1 Corinthians, he says, you and I, we're all running races. What crown do you want? The Corinthians ran races for crowns made of laurel, which was a plant that rotted and withered away. And he says, you want that crown? Or do you want a crown of eternal glory where the Lord of all creation looks at you and says, I put a crown of thorns on my son's head so that I can give you a crown of glory? Self-control doesn't come by willpower. It comes by love. It comes by knowing that someone loved you that much to take a crown of thorns so that you and I can have a crown of glory. And in our moments of weakness and in our moments of temptation, when life is out of control, we look at him and say, we focus on him who ran the race. He ran the race that we could never run. So why do we feel that we have to run the little races now and let the little loves take over our heart? Why can't we reorder our loves? Because we don't see the cross. Brothers and sisters, every day that you wake up, if you want to reorder your loves, if you want to show self-control, reorder your love by looking at the cross first and saying, that's love. His for me. His life for mine. He lost control so that I know that I'll never lose control. Now, how does this look practically? Let me give you an illustration. What does it mean to run the race? I know, if you've been at church, you've read these verses over and over again, so have I. Run the race, throw away everything that clings to you and all sin, look to Jesus. What does it mean? If you're running the race, the way that if you're freed by the gospel and you're running the race of your life in that mode, here's what happens. Do you remember the movie Chariots of Fire? You remember that movie? I'm dating myself now. The old movie from the 80s. There's two runners. And every time I read this verse in Corinthians or Hebrews, I can't help but think of these two guys. You remember this one, Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams. And they're competitive runners. They run against each other. They run races. They run long-distance races. And now you're starting to think of that theme song, right, in the head as they run down the beach, right? Eric Liddell. Why am I doing this with my arms? I don't know. Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams. Now, they both ran races, and from the outside, they both looked like they were running the same race, but here's what the gospel does to you. If you let it into your heart, here's how it's going to change the way you run your race and that I run my race of life. Harold Abrams experienced extreme anti-Semitism when he went to Cambridge. And because he was hated on for most of his life, and he experienced this extreme anti-Semitism for who he was, he ran. But why did he run? There's one part in the movie where his girlfriend, Sybil Gordon, looks at him and she says about running, do you love it? Do you love it? You run all the time. Do you love it? And Harold looks at her and he says, I'm more of an addict. Self-control. He says it's in a compulsion with me. A weapon I can use. Why does he run the race? It's a weapon. He has no joy in it. He says, I'm like an addict. I have to do it. On the other hand, Eric Liddell, of course, was raised by missionaries. He's a Scottish missionary family, and there's a part in the movie where he explains why he runs races. And it's entirely different. Harold Abraham says, I run a race as a weapon. I run the race to get what I get, what I need. And Eric Liddell has the famous line. He says, I believe that God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Listen, you're going to run a race, Paul says. All of us do. When you run your race of life, do you look at the cross for reordering your love in such a way that you can say, I run, and when I run, I feel his pleasure? The gospel says, no matter how out of control your life is right now, no matter what little pocket of life that you want to hide from others, you can get control over it. You can feel his pleasure, the gospel says. If only you look to his son dying for you. That love will free you from whatever it is that holds you down right now. And as I close, let me give some practical ways that this works out. Very practically, if you look at the cross, every morning you wake up and you say, that's love from me, your loves will be reordered. But self-control is hard. And I know that some of you are dealing with chocolate, and some of you are dealing with being overly critical of others. Some of you are dealing with this thing, and some of you are dealing with that thing. Here's two things about self-control that you need to know. First, it takes time. Secondly, it takes community. Let me explain what I mean by it takes time. There's a famous part in Hamlet. If you remember, Hamlet's wrestling with his mother, and she's dealing with temptation, and she's dealing with control issues. And Hamlet knows that his uncle killed his father, and now his mother, Gertrude the Queen, has married the uncle. And now they're going back and forth in the bedroom, and he's yelling at her, and he finally convinces her that she's somewhat guilty for doing this. And she sort of looks at him, and she says, but I have to go back to your uncle. I can't not go back to your uncle. And it's this ultimate battle of temptation. She's losing control in her life. And Hamlet gives her the best advice for what I mean by it takes time. And because it's Shakespearean, I'm going to put it on the screen for you. And you can follow along with what I like to call the New Eric translation of Shakespeare, because not everybody likes Shakespeare, although he speaks so beautifully. Here's what Hamlet says first. He says, oh, throw away the worser part of it, and live the pure with the other half. Forget the times you've fallen in temptation in the past, and focus on the good. He says, assume a virtue, mother, if you have it not. Fake it until you make it. He says, that monster, custom, who all sense doth eat, of habits devil is angel yet in this, that to the use of actions fair and good, he likewise gives a frock or livery that aptly is put on. Habitual temptation seems good, but it's fake, and there's a way out. And this is the best line. He grabs her face. You remember it? He says, refrain tonight, and that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence, the next more easy. Just don't do it today, and it will be easier not to do it again tomorrow. He says, for use almost can change the stamp of nature and either master the devil or throw out with wondrous potency. Once more, mother, good night. He says, for doing something can almost become being, and it can change you from the inside out. Either try to control your temptations or throw them away with great strength. It's your choice. See, Hamlet knows it takes time. Refrain tonight. And in this abstinence, a certain easiness comes with the next. Refrain tonight. The gospel gives you the power to do that. But lastly, it's community. Over the next couple months, if you come to Soul Grace, you're going to hear me talk a lot about community. I'm going to be putting a real big emphasis. We're going to start more small groups than we have right now. We're going to try to launch more and more and more, because it's in small groups. It's in community, when you meet with somebody every week, that they get to know you, and you get to know them. And you can start to look at their life and say, listen, I love you, but you're getting out of control here. And they have the power and the ability and the access to look into your life, and they can say, listen, I love you, but this is a part where you're spinning out of control. Can we talk about this? Self-control takes rooting yourself in the gospel message, but it takes time. Refrain tonight. And it takes community. Enter into the lack of control of others around you. Join a small group. Invest, and let others invest in you. And they will help you keep the self-control that God gives you through the gospel and grace. Please pray with me.